turn of the century wasn't coloured only by the promise of the millennium and the Sydney Olympics. It was also a year of fear, of fretting over the Y2K bug and the looming GST.
By the time you arrive at work, you'll have already been hit by the GST at least 25 times. Wake up, Australia.
We pay enough taxes as it is, and I feel it's disgraceful.
There's no way that GST will ever be part of our policy. Never ever, it's dead.
So what's this new GST then, Mr. Howard?
John Howard changed his mind. He and Treasurer Peter Costello went to the 1998 election seeking a mandate to introduce a GST.
There is no doubt, my fellow Australians, that this country desperately needs a new taxation system.
It nearly brought them undone.
The hairdressers said people couldn't afford to go to the hairdresser as much, so baldness would increase. Australia Institute said people would die on the roads because of GST, because, you know, petrol would be cheaper and they'd use their car more and therefore they'd die.
Concern drifted across the income brackets. Australia's wealthiest man called the Prime Minister.
I remember that night very well. He rang me and he said, "You're mad. What are you doing this for?"
So why was he doing it? At the time, Saul Eslake was the ANZ's chief economist.
Australia was relying too much on income tax as a source of revenue for the federal government and not enough on taxes on consumption.
Our indirect tax system was just so chaotic. We had a wholesale sales tax system, which just, it couldn't work in a modern economy. So something had to be done.
In the 1980s, Labor had toyed with the idea of a GST.
I'm keeping the pressure on for a consumption tax. Absolutely. I'm not in this for fun.
The party abandoned the idea as politically toxic.
We don't want the GST! We don't want the GST!
In 1993, one of Mr Howard's predecessors as Liberal leader, John Hewson, campaigned on the tax, but drowned in the detail.
If I buy a birthday cake from a cake shop and GST is in place, do I pay more or less for that birthday cake?
Well, it will depend whether cakes today in that shop are subject to sales tax or they're not, firstly. Right,
and there's icing and maybe ice cream, and then there's candles on top of it.
That's right. Now, that's what I'm addressing in the question. To give you an accurate answer, I need to know exactly what type of cake.
But it's just an example.
You'd seen John Hewson fell apart when he couldn't explain a birthday cake. And you're very conscious that one bad mistake here meant the end of the whole thing.
What about work on a car? If you're selling a car or a boat or a house, you're going to pay GST on that, aren't you?
Well, if you have repairs done, if you send your car down to a mechanic.
Howard and Costello knew they had to step up and sell the complex tax to a sceptical public.
What's your name for? To make sure that we didn't get too bogged down in detail and to keep reminding people of the essentials, that this tax reform would make the Australian economy more outward-looking, more competitive, and that we were looking after the vulnerable. And by hammering those two things, we just got over the line.
Mr Howard convinced us when he spoke the other night on the television.
But convincing voters was only part of the battle. The coalition had to get the tax through the Senate. Peter Costello negotiated with the Australian Democrats and its leader, Meg Lees. Miss Lee's speech has been affected by cancer treatment.
And as Treasurer, he had to, under Liberal rules, authorise any changes. But he wouldn't make the changes that we needed to ensure the package was fair and that it only affected financially the well-off.
So the Democrats were trying to ping holes in the base and I was trying to plug the holes, basically.
She was drafting a press release about the death of the negotiations when the Prime Minister stepped in.
We were in the process of working away when I got a phone call late at night from John Howard saying, "Hang on, let's have a chat."
Thank you. She had the numbers we needed. And if we'd have said no to her, what was the alternative? Either you didn't have a GST, or we went back to the public in a double dissolution. You've got to be joking.
You must be happy.
In the end, we came to a compromise, which mainly involved taking food out of the GST. We could all live with it, and we have lived with that for 25 years. My view was it would have been better if food had been in.
Tonight is not agony, it's sweet political enjoyment of the most exotic kind.
The tax was introduced on July 1, 2000. The ground softened by Joe Cocker.
Unchain my heart, baby.
Australia is currently being held back. We are tied to a tax system that's been patched up over and over again since the 1930s.
Great ads, you know, they just sort of showed the chains falling off business as taxes lowered and the money rolling into Joe Cocker as the royalties were received.
A quarter of a century on, the Democrats may be no more. There has been no obvious epidemic of baldness, and fear of the GST has eroded.
Now we look back and we say, you know, we wouldn't be without it. In fact, the only complaint I get of GST these days is people say it should be higher.
Saul Estlake says the tax should be broadened to take in food and services like school fees and health insurance.
I would certainly do that. I'm also in favour of raising the rate of the GST to bring it more into line with that in other countries that have a GST.
It was a fundamental reform, and although we still need a lot more tax reform now, 25 years later, our tax system would be something of a wreckage if we hadn't at least introduced the GST and made those other changes.